How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the channel, or welcome to the channel. Today, we're going to start off with the Modern Horizons 3 Precon upgrades that I like to do with the Precons. Now, not everybody agrees with the Precons coming in a Modern Horizons set, but I'm not one of them. I actually like seeing new cards printed directly into Commander because it's one of my favorite formats. So that said, let's delve into the deck right now, the Graveyard Overdrive, and let's see what we can do with this thing to make it a little more thematic. Graveyard Overdrive is led by Disa the Restless and Korum the Undertaker. Disa is a human scout for 2, a black, a red, and a green. It says whenever a Goyf permanent card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, put it onto the battlefield, and whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create a Goyf token, and it's a 5/6. And Korum the Undertaker, for 1, a black, a red, and a green, says that it's a human warrior, and it gets +X+0 equal to the greatest power among creature cards in all graveyards. And when Korum attacks, each player mills a card, and during each of your turns, you may play a land card and cast a spell from among the cards in graveyards that were put there from libraries this turn, and it's a 0/5 to begin with. Now, Wizards of the Coast has experimented in the past with cards that create token versions of existing spells and other cards, but normally it's something like a minor thing like a Llanowar Elf or an Arbor Dryad. This time around, though, we're getting token copies of a former powerhouse card in Goyf, and that's coming off of Disa the Restless. The Goyf really isn't in vogue these days, relegated to the category of boomer magic when brought up in discussion, but it's still a really strong creature, and being able to create multiple copies in Commander can get out of hand if the deck is set up to push token creation. As for Korum, we're getting a possible Voltron type commander that gets pumped up by having something big and smashy in the graveyard. Now, you give him some kind of evasion, and this could become a very dangerous thing for our opponents. And that doesn't even touch on the other ability that Korum has, casting a spell and playing a land from your graveyard, as long as those cards hit the grave this turn. The ability on this one feels like the Legends from Fallout, Raoul the Troubleshooter, which lets you cast cards that or milled that turn from the graveyard. But this is actually better because not only do you get 2 things, a land and a creature, but Korum doesn't care how they get into the graveyard. You can sack something, get a creature that was destroyed in combat, mill, discard, it doesn't matter. Korum will allow you to get them back the turn that those things hit the yard. However, these 2 commanders are slightly opposed to what you want to be doing with each one of them in the deck. Disa wants Goyfs to hit the bin and then come right back to make Tarmogoyf, and then you also want to make Tarmogoyf tokens off of her in combat damage. Korum wants to do things in the graveyard and get them to be recast and bury big stuff in the yard to up his own powerful hits. The problem with that is if we focus on having this as a Goyf deck, we're going to be knocking Goyfs into the yard, and then if Disa and Korum are both around, they're not going to stay in the yard. Those Goyfs are going to bounce back into the battlefield, and they're not going to help Korum do his thing. Korum wants really large stuff like worms, dragons, dinosaurs, Eldrazi's, those kind of things to make him bigger, and then to recast them from the yard later on down the line. So for this video, I'm going to base the deck off of what Disa is doing for us and make it like a Goyf deck instead of the other way around, because she's much more unique. I will, however, at the end of the video give you some suggested cards to play in the deck with Korum so he can get super smashy for you if that's your idea of fun. Now, a word of warning, with some of the cuts that I'm going to be doing in this deck, they are some of the new cards printed directly into the deck. Now, why am I doing that? Because they're not exactly doing what we want with Disa as the commander in the deck, and I'm not a fan of what they do with her at the front. That said, let's get into the cuts and the replacements. First up is Bloodbraid Elf. We're going to have, this cascading thing going on, but it messes with some new cards in the deck, one of which I'm keeping, the Gluttonous Hellkite. And there's just not enough cards in that deck at 3 or less that I care to cascade into off the Bloodbraid Elf. So instead, let's get the actual Tarmogoyf, the original version of it, in the deck. As of recording, it's still a reasonable $8 to $10, but it'll likely go up in price if players want to add it to their own versions of this deck, so plan accordingly. Then we're also going to take out another of the Cascade cards, Bloodbraid Challenger. This is second verse, same as the first. Cascade is not where I want to be in this deck, and it messes that new dragon up along with any other X spells that you might want to add into the deck. And the only thing about this one that made me think about keeping it was that it can hit all the Goyfs off of its Cascade because it's a big enough thing to hit them. But in the end, I decided for more reanimation spell with Blood for Bones. This is a greatly underutilized spell for the cost of a smaller creature. getting sacrificed to it, you get 2 creatures back, 1 to hand, 1 to the battlefield. And in this deck, I think the reanimation will serve us better than the randomness of a cascade effect. Now, I know I've been harping on about this Gluttonous Hellkite getting screwed up by cascades, and I like the card as a whole in the deck, and I'm going to keep it in the deck, but I'm cutting its dragon partner, Broodmate Tyrant. Now, why am I doing this? It is a very powerful spell, but this deck is more about the Goyfs. That's where I'm pushing it rather than dragons, and this dragon doesn't have the utility of eating my opponent's creatures when it comes in like the Gluttonous Hellkite. Yes, it can bring a boatload of tokens the one time you get to encore it out of the battle thing, or if you have ways to juggle it out of your graveyard, but that's really it. If this deck were loaded with token doublers instead of, and it was actually like a dragon focus, I'd be in favor of keeping it. But flavor-wise, it's a miss for me here, so I want to kick it out. Instead, I want another way to give haste for our creatures other than the anger that they include in the Precon. So I'm going to go with one of my favorites, Rhythm of the Wild. We get options here to either pump our stuff up or give haste, but we also get to make blue players very sad that as we strand their counter magic in hand as we launch our Goyf Assault. Now let's take a look at one of the Planeswalkers. The Planeswalkers in this deck only have a limiting factor on what they can actually do for us, and they don't really contribute to what I want to do with Decklist, so we're going to cut some of them. We're going to start off with getting rid of Garruk Apex Predator. It is a strong card, but it is very high in mana cost, and it doesn't fill our yard or reanimate anything that we really want with this. Instead, let's add one that's much cheaper to cast and can contribute to the graveyard themes of the deck with Liliana the Last Hope. The -2 not only mills us, it can also get a creature back that was already in the bin. It is just a much more mechanically favorable Planeswalker for this deck. And then we're going to start chopping another new card. Let's get rid of Tempt with Mayhem. Like so many other cards in this deck, they just don't really fit the theme of the deck with what I want to do, which in this case is to drop as many different card types into the graveyard along with some creatures to reanimate to help with the Lurgoyf theme here with Disa. And this card really doesn't do it for us. There's only 13 copyable instances and sorceries in the entire deck, many of which you do not want to give a copy of to an opponent, or they will just mess up your plans or advance themselves further ahead than what you're really going to do. So instead, I want to add a card into this deck that'll help us get creatures back repeatedly with Malevolent Awakening. You want a creature back, you sack a Goyf token or something like that, or a Mana Dork or something in that wheelhouse, and you use the Awakening to get them back to your hand. And then the activation can be done at instant speed, helping you dodge Grave Hate, unlike most recursion spells. Next up on the chopping block is going to be Death Reap Ritual. Look, having cards like this is great in this deck because things are going to be dying and you're going to get cards off of them. However, we have better available for this sort of thing, and it doesn't matter how many things have died, you get 1 card off of that morbid trigger. For 1 more mana, I would rather use Moldervine Reclamation. Now we get a card and a life for each creature dying, which makes this so much better against board wipes. They take out, 5 or more creatures. With a wipe, you're getting 5 or more cards and 5 or more life instead of just the 1 card and no life off that Death Reap ritual. And the final knock on the ritual is that you have to wait to get the card because of that it's morbid is an end of turn thing. The Reclamation just gives you the cards right as they die, so you could use it in combination with Sacrifice Engines if you want to add those to your deck, or just to wipe your own board and get access to new cards right away. All around, it is just a much better card for this kind of thing. And then our next cut is a card that strictly gets worse as the game goes on, and then it does nothing for us if an opponent has an empty hand, and that is Siphon Mind. If you can launch it in the early game and while players still have cards, it's a great card, but drawing it later on when somebody is empty-handed, this thing is just so much worse to cast. So instead, I'm going to include another death trigger card for card drawing with Species Specialist. You name Lurgoyf in this deck, and every time one of them dies, you'll get a replacement card, even the token versions. It's just a clean, efficient way to let you cash in even when the Tarmogoyf tokens die. And the only downside to this card is it has only seen 1 printing, so it's starting to get up in the price category, but it's not awful, but it's not a bargain card either. And then our next cut is a card that I really like. I use it a lot on MTG Arena, and that is Kolaghan's Command. The commands are actually very much getting power shoved out of the format. The power creep is very real here. It just doesn't do enough with this deck for what we want. Artifact removal, we can do better than this. 2 damage, we can do better than this. A single discard that we don't get to choose, we have better ways of doing these kind of things. The only thing that this actually does that we really want is that bring a creature back to our hand, but again, we have better options in the game. Instead, I'm going to replace it with a card from Fallout that not only helps us clear the board up for us, but it also gives us rad counters to help us mill things into the graveyard for our Goyf and reanimation strategies, and pushes the strategies of the deck further ahead than what the Gulligan's Command can do for us. Another card that just doesn't quite do enough of what I want in this deck is Riveteer's Charm. It's nice to have flexibility in these cards, but this one just isn't where I want to be. Instead, I want to add a card that acts in a dual fashion for us with Moonlight Bargain. It's a pseudo draw, but it's also a way to bury cards in our graveyard, and it's also castable at instant speed, so you can do some combat shenanigans with the Goyfs by using this during combat to put more cards in the graveyard. So ones that count, multiple things in the yard, things that look at card types, whatever. You can really mess with that combat math with this card, or you can bring them to your hand at instant speed and fill your hand back up. Now, this next cut is probably going to be quite controversial, and somebody might call me out for it. I'm sorry, this is my opinion, but I'm cutting out Archon of Cruelty from this deck. Look, this is a powerful card, but it does not fit the theme of the deck, and it is not meant to be something that you want to hardcast at 8 mana. It's meant to be more of a reanimation target and cheat it into play type thing. But then sometimes you're not going to get it online that quickly. This is more, I don't know, this is more of a competitive 60-card Magic type thing rather than something I really want to play in Commander itself. So instead, for a big black threat, I'm slotting in Shieldred Whispering One. Now, the original Shieldred here not only gives us a big threat, it also gives us a card advantage in the fact that it eats away at our opponent's stuff and brings our stuff back from the graveyard, repeatedly as long as it's online, which is what I really want, is more recursion effect in the deck. Moving along, oh look, it's another new card that I'm going to chop from the deck. So yeah, this is Exterminator Magmark. Now, this card is very good in the right shell. This Precon, however, even slightly upgraded, is not that shell. There's literally only 3 instances or sorceries in the entire base version of the Precon that can target an opponent's permanents to get any actual mileage out of the Magmark. I counted them, it's dumb. That's a tough hill to climb, to get this out and then hope you have one of 3 cards in the entire deck in your hand to get the copies on this thing to work. Instead, I'm going to go back to Fallout, and we're going to go ahead and use the Tato Farmer. This farmer here is one of the favorite cards that I have from that Mutant Menace Precon. It puts rad counters on us as a landfall trigger, and it helps with all the other self-mill and type stuff in the deck where we can bring lands out of the yard off of him. So then we can go ahead and get more rad counters on us. I just like this guy in the deck, and it helps push us further ahead. Now, I mentioned earlier I was going to cut Planeswalkers with a plural, but we've only talked about Garruk. Well, we're going to take out Liliana Death's Majesty as well. She helps with the milling of our stuff, but she costs so much that there's better things that we can do for self-milling here in the deck. And I'm going to actually put in a copy of Golgari Thug. It's not much, but the real power in this is the Dredge trigger that's on this thing. You can mill us for more than the Liliana can do for us, and we can also play it out as a chump blocker to give us the ability to put a creature back on top of our deck if we really want something back from the grave, becoming a dual-purpose recursion spell as well. And then our last cut from the deck is the 3rd Cascade card in the deck, Bituminous Blast. Now, why is there a Cascade theme in this Precon? I really don't understand. As with the Bloodbraid earlier, it's just, there's reasons here that just apply in the same way. We don't want to cascade into Gluttonous Hellkite. There's just not enough stuff I really want to hit off of Cascades at this low amount. And 4 damage at 5 mana is very laughable in Commander. So rather than running this, we're going to slot in a card from the Modern Horizons 3 main set, a reprint that I really like in this deck, and that is Victimize. This can allow us to get back any pair of threats like the Lurgoyfs, any of the Shieldred if she gets killed, whatever. We can use this to help terrorize our opponents, and this kind of reanimation is what the deck needs to thrive. And then, as promised, here's a short list to help with the Korum fans out there who want to beat down with Korum. Let's take a look at things like Case of the Trampled Garden, which will give him trample and make him bigger, Fight Rigging to make him bigger and get free spells off of him that way, Railway Brawler, which will actually look at the power when he comes in off of whatever's in the graveyard that's the biggest, and then double the power off that way. Impervious Great Worm or any other massive monster that you want to bury in the graveyard using things like Buried Alive, Lively Dirge, and Entomb. All these things can put a Impervious Great Worm in there, and then it's a 15 power boost to Korum, and then you can just go to town. These cards will amp him up, so he will just become a massive thing for our opponents to have to deal with. And then if you sprinkle in some evasion things in here, you're off to the races as you try to blackjack an opponent out of the game and deal 21 commander damage to them, and then they are done. So that's what I have for you guys today. Let's see what you guys think down in the comments below. And while you're down there, if you like this video, please like, share, comment, subscribe. All those things help the channel grow. And as always, thank you for watching. Have a great day, and keep an eye out for the next upgrade video.